All right, what's going on? Thanks for checking out the stream here. My name is Brandon, and we're going to play some games, and we're going to talk about some fun stuff, some important stuff, like what the relationship should be between the church and the state. I think that's fascinating. If you don't and you just want to watch gameplay, that's fine. But we're going to talk about that because it's really cool. We're also going to chat about anything else that happens to come up, any themes that come up that are religious or political within this game. We're going to play some Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. Came out in 2023, super fun. So if you join in and you want to ask a question, feel free to ask away. And yeah, I think if you have any comments, leave those as well. And we're just going to jump into it a little bit. I don't have much planned for this one necessarily. This is just going to be a fun time, and we'll just chat passively. I'm planning on making a bit of a video, actually, talking about, I guess, my stance on why or what I believe about the church and state. And I think that'll be probably done within the next, hopefully week or two. It takes a long time to record these things and script them and deliver them properly. But that's what I'm going to start with. I'm going to just chat about that as it comes up. If I had to give a brief summary, I think that the church actually needs to be more involved in the realm of politics. I think it needs to be acting in a manner that is, I guess, more of an authoritative moral compass to the nations. The church must be. Because there is no such thing as a neutral arbiter of truth and morality. There's no such thing as a perfectly neutral state. There's going to be a worldview that guides the morality of the government that presides and rules over its citizens or represents its citizens, in our case, in the USA and in Canada. And I believe that the church must fill that role, because if the church does not fill that role, then secularists, pagans, or alternative religions that do not have a true worldview will be dictating what is good and what is evil, or at least dictating the expression of good and evil through policy based on their worldview, which is untrue. So I think the church has to take that role, and it must be confident in taking that role. So that's where we're going to start today. And I guess we'll just start talking about stuff. So why don't we get going into the game? So we got Tears of the Kingdom. I figured that we didn't want to waste any time. I didn't want to waste any time watching the opening, because if you're watching this, you've probably seen this game before. So we're just going to get into it, and we're going to talk. I've got some notes, but nothing really prepared. My notes are actually kind of the script that I've been slowly working on anyway. So let's get started. Let's do a new file for Tears of the Kingdom. This was probably one of my favorite games over the last little while. I played this game. This game came out when my first child was born, basically. So I played this game as my first child was sleeping, basically. So I would hold him in my arms and we would play, or I would play. I haven't played it in a little bit though, so I'm gonna have to get used to the controls again. But this is such a good game. Filled with interesting themes, great gameplay. I don't know why I feel like there's a lot of hate in this game, like hate on this game. And I'm not sure really why. I didn't really play a ton of Breath of the Wild. So I suppose that's why. Maybe people were just really big Breath of the Wild fans, and I didn't really care so much about it. At the time, I didn't have a Switch either at that point. And I've only got a Switch 1 right now, not a Switch 2. So that's that's my loss, I guess, right now. But we're going to keep on doing it anywhere. We're going to keep on moving. We're going to have some fun no matter what. I'm not a speed runner either. So don't expect anything incredibly creative or speedy or interesting in terms of core gameplay. We're just going to play. We're going to chat. And if anything cool comes up, I don't know, if there's any breaking news, I've got my phone here with X open, so I'm going to keep an eye on that. Grab this chest first. There's always a chest that I miss at the beginning of the game. I got to remember where that is. Actually, why don't we start by putting this on? That's a good start. If you, I mean, I remember the moment when I stepped out on this platform the first time, man. What a feeling. Such an open game. It's so cool. All right, let's jump. No wasting time. If you played Zelda in the past, like, I don't know, what's your favorite Zelda game? If you are, you know, in the chat, you want to chat a little bit, what's your favorite Zelda game that you played growing up? Maybe it was only one. I mean, I'm not that old, but I'm old enough where, you know, Zelda's not exactly, I don't know. There's a lot of options, I guess. So now you're not limited for options when it comes to Zelda games when you get to my age. Oops. Gotta remember the controls again. Funny, I literally drowned. I think not here, but very quickly. Maybe close to the Temple of Time. First time I played through this game because I didn't even realize that there was such a, you know, you would drown if you lose your stamina in the water. Duh. Kinda dumb. I think I started the game too holding, like, handheld for this game, so I was not super impressed with the visuals. Mostly because this is kind of blown out, I feel like. Everything looks almost too bright. Alright, let's see if I remember this. There we go. Useless. Yeah. So, I guess we can get started with the chats on the important stuff, not just the fun stuff. Not just the fun game and all that. All that. I am, I would advocate for a Christian government. I guess we can start there. What is the role of government? I believe that the role of government, as put forward in Romans, is basically to reward good and punish evil. I think there should be evildoers should be fearful of the government, and those who seek to do good, again, good and evil defined by the Bible, defined by God's word, they need to be. So the government needs to be enforcing laws that make the evil people fear the government, feel repercussions. They must punish evil, and then reward the good. Again, based on God's law, not based on, you know, man's understanding of things, you know, any kind of secular worldview or even, you know, false religion. So anyway, that's already jumping ahead. So the government's responsibility is to reward good, punish evil, and bear the sword. That means they are the rightful authority to execute punishment, but also to engage in warfare, protective war, defensive war. And so government is essential. I don't think you can be a Christian anarchist. I think government is actually a gift. The Bible talks about the government being a gift. And so the government is not something that we should be rebelling against as a concept. And Christians should be very thankful that we have governments, especially, you know, the forms of government that we have today. as much as, it's frustrating sometimes, as much as we disagree with our governments. We should be thankful that we have some form of say in our government. That manifests primarily as voting, but we also, in general, in the West, and I know that this is a contentious issue, and I agree that there's actually some major problems in this area, but we, in general, have the freedom to be able to articulate our opinion, push back when, necessary, and we can have a voice. It's not perfect, definitely, so I would, put a bit of an asterisk beside that. Oh, man. Yep, skip. Yeah, so that's important to recognize, is that the government in general is a gift, so we should treat it as such. And we should be engaged in government as well as Christians. So that's, that's a whole other conversation. And that will be more or less the end of my conversation, my video, when I end up talking about it, is that Christians need to be involved more in depth. Oops. Good start. First hit. Boop. Christians need to be more involved in politics. And so back to first principles, I guess. Yeah, Christians need to be, or the government needs to be faithfully executing that role. And if they are executing that role as defined by Scripture, that is a thing that the church should celebrate. We shouldn't be advocating for, what's it called? Anarchy. Anarchy is not, in general, good. Take that. Nope. Oh, that was good. That's gonna break, though. Yeah, I knew that. Saw that coming. See ya. It's always good to pick up these construct horns at the early game. You can get plenty of... Yeah. You can get plenty of construct horns as soon as you get the second... what are they called? Shrine. Once you get the second shrine, you're able to do the fuse command, or the fuse ability. Thank you. There's also a one thing that I found early on when I played through this game the first time. It was pretty awesome, and I'm sure that other people have found it too. There is such an easy way. I remember everyone was talking so much about, oh, yep, you gotta, do your, the cooking the meat at the right time, and if you cook the meat at the moon, the blood moon, you'll be good to go. You'll have plenty of high healing food in this game. But I found really quickly that there's this spot. I forget exactly where. I know where. I just don't remember what it's called. You can pick up a bunch of tomatoes, and you just pick a whole bunch of tomatoes, and you cook with the tomatoes, or you cook the tomatoes. You just cook a stack of 5 or a stack of 4, and those tomatoes heal you so fast. It's probably I never had a single problem with health. Oh, see, this is where I think I drowned the first time I played through. I underestimated the amount of stamina that it took to get there, and I just drowned immediately. So bad call. Don't do that. And let's just get back up here to full health, full stamina. Yeah, there's a lot of different opinions on the role of the church, or role of the state. And nowadays, I think there's a lot of Christians who just hate the concept of the state because of how much they disagree with the state. On the conservative side, because it seems right now conservatives are the ones that are getting their butts beaten all the time by the government. There's constantly challenges to religious freedom or, speech laws in, the UK or in Canada. Man, in Canada. Yeah, I'm a Canadian, and guys, we got it rough here. It's not looking good. So it always just feels like it's better to just have no government. But no, government is actually really good. I don't want vigilante justice. I'd rather not have vigilante justice. People just roaming the streets, doing whatever they want. A bunch of Batmans. Not a good thing.
I'm sorry. I did not intend to start.
Now we meet the Goat Man.
It was I that spoke to you earlier. That arm originally belonged to me. I am Raru.
Was it Breath of the Wild? I think it was Breath of the Wild that had the most, or the first instance of a Legend of Zelda.
Unfortunately, I no longer
Legend of Zelda being voice acted, not just grunts and gasps. I think that's correct. It wasn't Twilight Princess, I don't think.
It seems to have lost the power to do so.
I don't think we need to watch all the cutscenes. There's some good cutscenes that we'll watch, but I don't want to waste my time on that. And I'm sure you don't want to waste your time on that either. So we're going to skip that. Okay. Now we begin. I don't know. I don't really know what my goal is for closing off this stream. I'm not going to stream all night. I'm gotta wake up early, of course, as usual. But I want to see if I can get past. We're gonna do the island, the Great Sky Island. Get down to Hyrule. First, we're gonna get this bow. See ya. Yeah. I wonder, the state always gets a bad rap because of, its ability to wield power tends to be abused. It's very easy to abuse power once you get it. I think we see that all throughout history, a centralization of power that usually is utilized against, whatever. A specific group. It could be any group. It's not just Christians, obviously. Christians in the past have also done wrong and evil things while using the government, while they were maybe in charge of the government. And there was a very, very tight relationship between the church and state. That's not a good thing either. And that's something that I think the church can own. But in general, I don't think that's an argument for the church not being involved in the state or in civil matters. I think it's a bad argument, actually, because I think that standard can be applied to every single worldview, every single one. Not a single worldview on planet Earth that has ever existed can ever be looked at and historically proven to be perfect or I don't know, spotless. This is not possible. That's a whole different conversation, right? Because then you get into the topic of I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. That's a crazy one. You can't skip these cutscenes. It's like Kingdom Hearts. I wish you could skip the dialogue boxes like you can in Kingdom Hearts in these games. So yeah, the state should be respected by Christians. Christians need to honor Caesar. Peter talks about that. We have to submit to the governing authorities. And that's a highly nuanced conversation as well, because obviously submitting to the authorities does not mean submitting and obeying the authorities when it contradicts the word of God. Obviously, God is the higher authority and he delegates authority. Man, I think it's all coming back to me now. He delegates authority to the lower authority, which is the government. And so if the government does something or orders something that is counter or anti-God or anti-Christ, it is actually a Christian's duty, moral duty, to not do that thing. I mean, that's just because Christians believe in an objective morality that also has an objective and like higher transcendent moral lawgiver and creator who has delegated that authority. And that's an argument that's presuppositional. But I think you can make obviously I think you can make a decent case for honoring the government from a secular perspective. But it's like any morality, right? Any kind of moral ought needs to be grounded in something, and it can't be grounded in, preference. It could be grounded in preference. It's just really weak, and then there's no obligation for anyone. Which is why when Christians make presuppositional arguments, presuppositional just means it kind of assumes the truth of Scripture. It assumes the Christian worldview and then works within the Christian worldview to make the argument. Then I forget where I was going with that. Anyway. Skip. Come on. This is the challenge of this game, is it is very slowly paced at the very beginning. Just you have to watch every single moment and cutscene. Not a big fan of that. But it opens up, and I really enjoy that. So Christians should respect the government, and the government should act in accordance with God's law. There's a good little summary of that. The government is the Lord's servant. The state is the Lord's servant. And we should treat it as such. How are we doing so far? I think we're doing pretty good. All right, let's keep moving. We've got an island to escape. All right, so what is the Christian's responsibility to government? Or what why don't we start here? What is the how involved should the Christian be in the state? I think that's a really interesting topic. It's a good topic to discuss. Did I get that bow? I think I did. Yeah. So there's been a couple of different philosophies with the state. And I think modern understanding, some modern understandings of the state and how the church should relate to it, I think has led to a bit of a Christian retreatism or escapism from culture instead of engaging in culture. They would argue that there is a higher calling for Christians, and it's either clergy or personal holiness. And we shouldn't get involved in the affairs of the world or the state because it is it's a lower calling. It's a distraction from discipleship. Discipleship is the primary responsibility of the church. Discipleship, make disciples, and evangelism by extension. I think that's a misguided approach. I think it's pietistic and misguided. I can see where it comes from, and I can appreciate it. I just think it's wrong. It's wrong-headed because if you don't engage in politics, politics will eventually engage with you. And by that I mean, if you disengage from the political sphere in the system that we currently live in, and that system is some form of democracy, where the people vote, make decisions, choose people to represent them, then your voice won't be heard. If all the Christians disappeared, then the Christians would not receive any kind of representation in government, and then laws would be created sans Christian influence. And we kind of stand on the shoulders of giants in the West because most of our religious or most of our political philosophy does come from some kind of Christian, ethic. So we would be fine for a little while, and we have been. But eventually, when the Christians stop speaking into the government, someone else will start speaking into government. They'll start taking, they'll start voicing their opinions, and different opinions can be good and helpful, and help with introspection and all that kind of stuff. But, oh man, what? Oh, the controller is doing that. I gotta get rid of that. Didn't kill it. Nope. Okay, how do I get rid of the controller? Special controls. No. Options. Aim with motion controls. Get out of here. I hate that. That's not fun. Where was I at? Gotcha. That's where I was at. So, Christians, if they do not speak into the government, they will not have representation within the government. Their opinions will not be heard, and the moral guidelines that Christianity provides, I think, will be slowly eroded. And I think we've seen that now already. Because different worldviews will come in and they will attempt to enforce their morality upon the populace, because what they believe that what they believe is true. It's the true worldview. So think of like Islam, for example, or secularism, secular humanism, some kind of like hedonism or hedonistic philosophy. Those they will step in and they will start to attempt to influence. Oh, hi there. They will attempt to influence the government for their benefit, so that way they can get what they want. They can do what they want. They get policies put into place that benefit them and their worldview. And this is true for every single, type of government. If it's a secular, people like to pretend that they're always looking out for the little guy. They're looking out for, what's best for the most amount of people. But again, the issue with that is that they're every single worldview is basing is going to base their policy based on what they believe is best for the most amount of people. Who defines what is best? Well, in a secular humanist perspective, that would be people. Oh, hey, sorry, bird. Didn't mean to throw that at you. Oh, those things break too fast. I'm not going to touch that. So, this myth of neutrality needs to be completely destroyed. Get rid of it. Take it out of your mind. You don't need to think about it anymore. It's gone. Everyone has an opinion. Everybody has a bias. And every state will have a moral starting point that needs to be recognized. Christians need to do this too, right? Like, we need to recognize that, we have a moral starting point that not everybody shares. Now, it doesn't mean we don't do what we can to enforce certain values that we believe are the most just, right? Because ultimately the goal for the Christian government should be to be just and establish justice, not in a weird, social justice way. I'm starting a movement now, as of right now. Take back the concept of justice from the progressive left. They don't own that. In the Old Testament, you've got calls for justice. I forget where. Like it's a lot in the prophets, where the prophets, the minor prophets. So Hosea, Joel, Amos, up to Malachi. They advocate strongly for concepts of justice and caring for the needy, caring for the poor. But justice doesn't just include social justice causes that are prevalent today. I think that's a myth and a lie that we have been sold, and the church has bought. They've bought this lie that if you want to care about justice, you have to care for justice in the same manner that the world defines justice, and they often define justice as social justice or whatever. Nowadays it's equity, all that kind of stuff. But no, justice is enforcing what is right and wrong and punishing what is evil based on God's law, God's standard. So we need to be doing that. And so every worldview has a bias, and they will execute their government and their governance based on that bias. So no more neutrality. Take back justice. We need to seek justice, and a Christian state, or a Christianized state. Those are two different political philosophies or political theologies. But a Christianized state would be obviously the most ideal in terms of getting righteous laws in place based on God's standard. I had a guy, I was debating a guy on, it was Facebook. This was right after Charlie Kirk got assassinated. And, man, I'm sorry, like, this is just like a tangent, but like Trump broke so many people's brains. I'm not, whatever. I think he's the right man right now. God's using him in great ways. I don't think he's saved, but I do think, he's at least, you can work with the guy. Christians can work with the guy. But man, Trump has broken the brains successfully of many people who, were maybe left-leaning. And then Trump got into office the first time, and they just exploded. Their heads exploded. They have no category for, a man that is as colorful and complicated and not ideal as Trump, being used by God for good things. And any evangelical who does see things that way is apostate in their minds, or sacrificing justice or goodness for the sake of political gain. It's like, no, that's not even close to what the mindset is of Christian political conservatives. Now, to be fair, not even to be fair, to be honest, anyone who I've had a long and intense discussion about this kind of stuff with, they never ask me what my political philosophy is or my political theology is. They don't tell me why I come to this conclusion. They just assume that I'm just a whatever. I'm a dumb conservative. That's not helpful. Oh man. Throw away the branches. Bye-bye. All right, fuse. This is where things get interesting and fun. You can actually do some damage now. Whoop. So, yes. Oh, yeah. This is, I think, is this where you get a piece of gear? Maybe not. I think it's still on the island. I think you just get arrows. Yeah, you get arrows. Was there anything else up here? I don't think so. So political philosophy Everyone's got a bias. Take another bow. Thank you. Everyone's got a bias. There's no neutrality, and we need to take back the concept of justice. And so, justice, if we can, eliminate from our mind this idea, and this is common in Christian circles, Christian conservative circles, and it needs to be abandoned, I think, is this idea that it was a pendulum swing in the wrong direction. The pendulum swing happened like this. The left, the political left, and the Christian left co-opted the concept of justice. They turned it into, this idea of social justice and equated justice with things like, socialist fiscal policy, equity, and elimination of meritocracy, DEI, all these buzzwords, political buzzwords. Justice meant those things. Racial justice, which has become a perversion of actual justice and just has turned into essentially racism on the other way as, not reconciliation, but actually, ow, that's not good. It's no longer reconciliation that people are seeking in that context, unfortunately. It is very quickly turned into, what's the word? I guess you can call it revenge. That was a waste of an apple there. No, I still need that. Don't want to get one shot. What's the word? It starts with an R. So it starts with the retaliation, revenge, whatever you want to call it. Justice became that on the racial side. And that was, the concept of justice was co-opted by the political and religious left to essentially, I think, bully Christians into accepting liberal and left political talking points and values. And it worked very well, unfortunately. So I think we need to reclaim this concept of justice. Justice does not mean what the left has now described it to be. I think we can, as Christians, fight for justice, and that justice does not mean liberal political points and political values and policies. Realistically, what we need to do is refocus the idea of justice around. We need to reorient the concept of justice around. Oh man, you're distracting me, buddy. Around a biblical understanding of good and evil, not around, what humans seem to want at the time, in their, jealousy. Every single, progressive policy is based on one of the 7 deadly sins, essentially. So define justice based on what God defines as good. So justice is not bad. Justice and, the social justice is kind of an ugly word, but the concept in general doesn't need to be avoided. It needs to be reoriented. I don't want to drop that apple. I do want to drop that, though. So here's where you just go crazy with fusing as much as you possibly can. And this is always a challenge. Oh, stop. I always, I'm like, I'm going to find a better weapon to fuse this item with or whatever. Which may be true. But, you gotta live. You gotta survive right now. Ooh. Boom. Ah. Jeez. Alright. Yep. I gotta get used to multi-enemy combat. I don't want to be embarrassing myself like that too much more. So if anyone has any thoughts on that, you're welcome to share it. I'm going to keep on getting these mushrooms. And actually, before I go into this fight, I better eat an apple or something. Come on. That's the wrong way to eat an apple. Come on. Oh, this is my favorite here. You just run and jump, and then you get the slow motion. I love that mechanic. That took me so long to figure out at the very beginning of the game when I first started playing. Uh-oh. These guys, I don't like them. There we go. Gotcha. So we can keep on talking about the state, the church and state. Once I get this chest. Yeah. I do want that, though. I can probably sacrifice my spiky stick. So the church and state need to have some kind of relationship, I believe, because politics is inherently moral. There's a buzzword or a buzz phrase that's been going around. I wish I coined it. And I said it a lot more, accurately or concisely. I was saying for years, I've been saying for a long time the church needs to get more involved in politics, and people would always have the common response, the church shouldn't be political, don't get political. I would say the church isn't getting political. Politics has become religious. And while that's true, I think Josh Howerton, who's a pastor in, I believe, Texas, he said it a little bit better. Like the church isn't becoming political. Politics has become, oh, you're not dead. Politics has become theological. And that's a better way of saying it. I should have said it theological instead of religious. But I would still say that politics has become religious in its own way, Politics is now it always has been religious. Politics is based on worldview, and worldview inevitably crosses over with some kind of religious elements. Whatever, people will be like, oh, I'm an atheist, so my political philosophy isn't religious in any way. It's like, okay, my worldview isn't religious in any way. It's like, maybe that's formally the case, but the elements of religion, like devotion, you have a certain ideology that you see, you use as your moral compass and your lens through which you do everything through, or try to do everything through, view everything through. There's practices and rituals. There's the archaic tunic. There's rituals that are done. There's doctrine and dogma as well, as much as a lot of atheists, might not want to admit. It's like, no, there's a lot of crossover with religion. There's religious elements. So every worldview, every government will inevitably kind of cross over with some kind of religious, religious mindset, religious process, religious devotion to their belief system. We're rolling. If only building a boat was that easy in real life. I can't say I've ever, in the history of me playing this game, used rushrooms. I probably should. I wasn't a very good cooker. But, yeah. Here we are now. Maybe I should once I found my my recipe for the ultimate way to cheese the game, which is just a whole bunch of Hylian tomatoes, I didn't experiment with anything else. I literally just did that. So not very exciting. Man, is it going to take me the entire stream just to get off of this island? Well, I guess I've already got 2 of the 4 shrines, and once you get the 3rd one, the 4th is like 5 minutes. So I suppose it won't be as long. So the church should get don't be afraid of the charge of the church getting religious or the church getting political. I've heard that so many times. Like, why are you getting too political? The church shouldn't be political. The church is greater than this. The church is beyond or outside religion. Oh, come on. The church is outside of the realm of politics. It's higher than politics. And like, while that is kind of the case, you don't even have a sword, bud. That hurt, though. While that is kind of the case, technically the case, it's no excuse to abdicate responsibilities or leave the most powerful element of society to pagans. Get up. That's a bad idea. So when people tell you don't get political, the church shouldn't be getting political, usually that's a defense mechanism, or it's a method to try and silence dissent on the right. It's almost never, and this is something I kind of noticed for a long time, but I also I wrote it down, I'm going to talk about it. I almost never see that charge thrown around on the left, like to the left. And this is fascinating. The reason why I think it's fascinating is because when the church gets accused, when the right wing gets accused of being political, they're normally talking about issues that are, pretty obviously, conservative Christians. So, things like abortion. For example, if you go to a church and the church, talks about abortion, they'll be sometimes challenged by either visitors or members saying, "Hey, you shouldn't get that political. Don't get involved in politics. It's not. Our job isn't to get involved in social fights or social or culture wars." But when, let's say, the political left, they try to get involved in politics or they try to discuss something, when the left decides to discuss an issue that's dear to them. So, for example, let's say, I don't know. Well, hey, let's say, let's talk about abortion. So let's do abortion both ways. Okay, yep. Let's do it both ways. If the right wing someone on the right, the political right, were to preach on a Sunday morning, and they mentioned abortion, I would argue it's very likely that they would end up getting an angry email, from one of their members, or a visitor, or someone who's a regular attender. They would get an email that said, "You should not be mixing politics with the church. Don't get political. We just want to hear the gospel." And, that oftentimes will be enough to silence many pastors from speaking the truth or speaking boldly on some of these issues. Now, contrast that with the left. When the right says stuff like that, for many years would receive harsh criticism from even other, let's call them soft conservatives on the right. But then when the left does something like that, the left will talk about, let's say, I was supposed to pick that up. when the left brings up these kinds of issues, so let's talk about abortion there as well, and they start treating it as an issue of women's rights, I don't see people accusing them of being political or getting political. What I often see is people will just avoid the conversation with them because they are convinced that the left has done such a good job, essentially. I would say the left has done such a good job of convincing the right that they aren't fighting political battles. They are fighting moral battles, and they are acting as activists and not as political pundits. So if you're a pastor who goes up on stage and you preach against abortion, you are political. You're getting political. But if you're a pastor who goes up on stage and you say, well, maybe there's some nuance here that we need to be, gracious with, and, we got to be really careful with women's rights and abortion, and maybe we shouldn't be so heavy-handed on abortion, and maybe there's some wiggle room in when we can and can't allow, like, that conversation, that's not political. That's not making a political statement. That's apparently making a moral statement or an activist statement, because you're fighting for the rights of women. And again, for some reason, we've been completely deceived into thinking that one side is political and one side's not. Every political issue nowadays is a moral issue. And that's why when guys like Josh Howerton will say things like, and what I've been saying for a while now is, the church isn't getting political. Politics became theological. Politics is crossing into this realm, this kind of moral realm. Politics is intruding into this realm, into this sphere. And it's trying to kind of take over the moral arbitration of society. And I think it's okay for the church to look at that and say, hey, no, you're not welcome here. You're not supposed to be doing that. That's not your job. So don't fall for that. And going back to my earlier point, I also think that if you are, being told by, if you are being told by people you are being too, religious, or you're being too political, you shouldn't be more political. You should leave the politics out of the church pulpit or something like that. I gave the example of someone who's maybe leaving a bit of wiggle room. That is definitely an example where people are, I would say, deceived into thinking that that's not making a political statement. But definitely when I see actual progressive Christians going up on stage and they'll preach about, they'll preach about abortion, they'll talk about abortion, and they'll advocate for abortion, full 9 months up to, birth, essentially. And I think that's the only consistent, real, place. If you're going to make the women's rights argument, and you're not going to concede that the baby is a human being, or even a human person until birth, I don't think you can make any kind of consistent argument in your own worldview for anything other than up to the moment of birth. I should probably eat this. I think it's a bad argument. I don't think that it's a good argument, but I think it's the only consistent argument that you can make. If a progressive pastor goes up on stage and starts preaching about why the church should cheer for women's rights and abortion on demand up to the point of birth, that will be disguised as activism because you're fighting for rights. It's not going to be discussed as a political issue. I think that's self-evident. I've seen that so many times. The double standard that exists is severe, the double standard that exists is also it's hypocritical, but it's unfortunately it's maintained by the soft political or soft theological right, who would, they would say in one breath, I'm a conservative, but then they would say in the next breath, we need to leave room at the table for those who disagree with us on these very, very, very important issues. I think that, again, is wrong-headed. I think you're adopting, or you're basically letting your guard down around people who want nothing more than to eliminate the entire, Christian right as a, viable movement. And I'll admit my bias as a Christian who wants to see Christianity be used. Ooh. As a Christian who wants to see Christianity used as the, ethical framework for civilization, I also would say that I want. Oh, that was dumb. That I want Christianity. I want the, the overall. I want the ideology of progressivism to be gone. Now, not through, violent means. I don't want there to be, a war. I don't think that that's the way that Christians are supposed to combat these ideas, these bad ideas. I think the primary means of doing that is through evangelism and discipleship. And so if the church has gotten to the point where it is now, where essentially we've got a bunch of, ineffective, untrained Christians trying to go toe to toe with secularists in their workplace, in their in their schools, that's on the church. That's the church's fault. But I do want to see the elimination of these really, really bad, harmful, destructive ideas from your average political conversation. Like, I don't want abortion to be even a semi-viable or a even an option that's considered in the minds of our politicians or of our just individuals in general. Because again, I can go into this way more in depth. My political philosophy does not start at the state. It starts at the ground level. It starts at individuals being evangelized and the church making disciples. And when I say make disciples, that includes political information. That includes being discipled in civil matters and state matters. Moral issues that have now become political issues. One of, back in the day, these issues wouldn't have even been considered. But now they are, because that, it's changed so drastically. The moral standard has changed so drastically. That's unfortunate. Ah, man, it's always one hit. Thank you. I feel like, in this game, I'm excited for a new game to come out, honestly. It's not that I'm bored, but, you play this game enough, you learn, you're not nervous anymore. It's not new, but it's still fun. I don't know why, I just, constantly am grabbing these bright bloom seeds. I feel like in my first playthrough and my first file, like my main file that I have completed the game with, I have an unreasonably large collection of bright bloom seeds that I did not touch. That's unfortunate too. Ugh, get out of here. Yep. Yeah. So the state is not unbiased, and Christians should be involved in the state because Christians have the truth. Simple as that. If Christians withdraw, that means the stewards of the truth, those who are responsible for the truth, are inactive in public discourse, leaving the most powerful earthly authority to be in the control of those who, either hate God or just deny his authority. Which are all bad ideas. Which is why it's interesting. A lot of these arguments ultimately come down to, apologetics. It really does become just a simple faith conversation. Because the immediate response you're going to hear from, a secularist or a Muslim or something like that is, and I had this argument in the debate that I was having with someone on Facebook. The argument that I had was it kind of climaxed at this point where this guy said to me, well, not everyone is a Christian, so because not everyone is a Christian, you should not try to enforce Christianity upon everybody. And I was like, man, like you missed every point that I tried to make. Now that's again like a bigger conversation there, but really what it came down to was he, like all Facebook or Twitter exchanges, it was essentially useless because he came in not wanting to engage in good faith. He just wanted to prove me wrong. Which I think he didn't, not even close, because he came to the conversation assuming that he was morally neutral, and he assumed a lot of things about me, assumed a lot of things about my beliefs, assumed a lot of things about what my political philosophy or theology would look like. And ultimately, he ended up just proving my point. That debate was interesting. All right, let's get this second last shrine. I want to get off of this island. So that argument was interesting. Why don't I talk about that? That's fun. This is such an important issue too right now. So I'm going to pause and talk about this. Never mind. I'm going to pause and talk about this after the goat man gets out of my face. Let's see. Make sure everything is still looking good. Yeah, we're doing great. Now for the most important power-up in the entire game. The Ascend ability. Alright. Let's go. Stop talking to me. See ya. Okay. Alright, let's talk about this now. This is fascinating. So, I can get rid of that chat as well. See ya. Okay. So, what happened in that conversation essentially turned into a debate around, language, and not semantics necessarily. So what happened was, I was making the case that the rhetoric of calling somebody a fascist intentionally carries with it connotations that lead to a visceral response within the people who hear and see the person who's labeled a fascist. And the reason why I was upset about this is because the person before that I was debating with, they told me, they just said straight up, Christians or conservatives are not vilified. They just said straight up that my position was laughable. I said that Christians and conservatives are vilified for their positions, and called all of these names that are extremely provocative and could imply that violence should be done to them. So, Nazi or fascist, other titles like that are extremely, provocative and very colorful. We all have the same or very similar response when we hear the word fascist or especially Nazi. And so when you label your political opponents with these names, two ideologies that we fought hot wars over, I think that's extremely problematic. It's extremely problematic. So I was making that case. I said that. The case that was then made back to me after I responded to them, and obviously they didn't answer back because they had no counter, because I also caught them. They also basically said, they said that conservatives are not vilified, but then they said that they deserve to be called fascists because the parallels are so clear between fascists and Nazis and modern conservatives. And so I messaged back like, okay, so conservatives aren't vilified, but when they are vilified, it's justified. Is that your position? And obviously he didn't respond. Then someone else responded. We got into a little bit of debate there. And I made the case to him. I was like, you don't even know what a fascist is. You can't define fascism. So why would you call me something that you can't define? And then he said, well, there's just a lot of parallels between fascism and conservatism. And I said, what is, how do you define fascism? He came back at me with a case basically saying something like, you are trying to institute fascism because you want the church or you want Christianity to be the guiding principle or the main primary worldview through which we create laws. And he said, you want fascism because you want to impose your morality on others, essentially. And I said to him, I was like, you've literally just proven my point. You have called conservatives, Charlie Kirk, as well as myself, a fascist. But you can't even define it because you are making the case that fascism equals religious worldview being thrust upon somebody else. It's like that's literally the opposite of fascism. Fascism is the accumulation of power of the state. The state becomes the primary source of personal identity. All goals are filtered through the state. Everything becomes about the state. There may be religion within the state, but it's not. The state itself is not defined by Christianity or religion. The religion is defined by the state, and the goals of the state become primary. And of course, he didn't respond to that because he proved my point completely. Why would you call somebody a fascist if you can't even define the word? All fascists and all of these words have essentially become they become weapons to secretly and sneakily associate pretty moderate positions with the most despised worldview and political philosophies of the 20th century. And so that justifies then action to be taken against them, whether it's legislative or in many cases nowadays, violent action. So that was a very interesting conversation. I hate debates that I do now over Facebook. I just don't want to do them. I'd rather have conversations over, whatever, coffee. I don't really drink coffee. I don't like coffee. So conversations over a glass of water or something like that. Anyway, now we can go back to the game. I just figured it just proved my point. Everything proved my point there. I thought it was incredibly dumb. And I don't think I convinced him. He definitely didn't convince me. So again, unfruitful conversations. It's definitely, an example of Proverbs, like answer not a fool according to his folly, lest you become like him. It's like, okay, I guess there's a certain point where you just don't respond. And Facebook is definitely, why even bother at this point? So we can go back to the game now. Game is more interesting. Let's get off this island. Take a break from talking about the heavy stuff. Let's talk about Zelda. Let's talk about the game. The ascend ability is fun. I feel like my second playthrough of the game, I found so many more places to actually use ascend than I originally, used in my first playthrough. And there's a few areas where I was like, I can't believe that I didn't think about that. I think fighting I forget the big rock guys. Fighting those guys, it's so much easier when you are using the ascend ability. You just ascend straight up through them and then smash the rock on top. Didn't do that in my first playthrough. Suffered through a bunch of fights that I didn't need to suffer through. So you live and learn. Alright, let's get up here. 2 more shrines to go. The shrines in this game are a bit of a grind. I would say that's my least favorite part of the game, unfortunately. It's just, oh crap. Just do what you gotta do. Go. 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 Alright, here we go. 1 more to go. So the church and state. Church needs to be more involved in the state. Let's get back to that. I think the broad case has been made now. I've made the general case for why the church needs to be more involved in civil matters. The question obviously is, kind of begged, should the state be a Christian entity or should it be separate? Like the whole concept of like separation of church and state is misunderstood. I mean, there's a whole, the late great Charlie Kirk did great work, kind of dispelling the myth of the founding fathers' desire for the full separation of church and state, as in, and this is for the United States, of course. I'm Canadian, but let's face it, Canadian politics kind of boring, and most of the time we're very reactive to what's happening in the States. Charlie Kirk did a great job of that. He talked a lot about how the founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson, what they talked about was not actually a full separation of Christianity from morality, the church dictating or the state dictating what's right and wrong. That's just not what their position was whatsoever. It was more of a separation of church and state, a distinction between church and state, so that way you wouldn't have a state. A state church, so like the Church of England. You wouldn't have the Church of America, and you could allow the states to, exercise their own freedom of religion. And you had the first, the founding documents of many of the colonies. I think it was 9 colonies or something like that. They were, they had religious standards that had to be, like, you had to be a Christian to be in public office. So let's not pretend that, separation of church and state means that the church should stay out of politics completely. I think that's dumb. That makes no sense. From a Christian perspective, if you're a Christian and you believe that the church should just be completely separate, I think that abandons a massive part of the gospel, the gospel's active effect on bringing the kingdom here. There's this already not yet concept, right, where the kingdom is already here, but it's not yet here. It's not in its fullness yet. And so if the kingdom is not here in its fullness, that's fine. That doesn't mean that we reject or we walk away from what little can be done. Let's do what we can to bring the kingdom here. Let's grab a drink of water first, actually, for some water ASMR. And my water bottle hitting it ASMR. There we go. That's better. Oh man, we're so close. Let's get off the Sky Island. I'm going to skip the rest of the cutscene. I just want to get off the Sky Island now, please. Spare me. Let's get to Hyrule. So obviously the debate then comes up: should the church kind of take over the state? Should pastors and bishops become the president, or congressmen, or the prime minister, or MPs? And I think that there are some people that will hold that that position. I don't personally. I'm open to being convinced, but I feel like it makes more sense that there would be still separation between church and state in terms of their function is different. The state wields the sword, but the church kind of guides the heart. I don't know if that makes sense. Oh, did I not hold it long enough? No. Yeah, so if you have, I don't think the state, whose responsibility is to bear the sword, should be responsible for the heart. On the other end, I don't think that the church, who's really meant to be the guide, I think it protects both if they're still separate. But the church must be involved at guiding the sword. If you are indiscriminately swinging a sword around, you're going to do more damage. Oh, I can skip ahead. If you're indiscriminately just swinging a sword all over the place with no guidance, you're going to hurt people. You're going to do evil things. But if you have a target, and if you have something to direct your force to, then you can use the sword as the tool that it was meant to be, in a manner that is effective, precise, and actually executes justice. And so if you in that analogy, the church is what provides the direction. But it kind of separates it still, where the church isn't the one that's carrying out the violence, and the state isn't the one that's dictating what's right and wrong. Because then, like, human nature, again, that was dumb. Human nature would lead to, it could potentially lead to corruption on either end. The state could become corrupt and influence religion, which I would say is the more important sphere, the church. Or, the church could become drunk with power, and then you get, things like the Inquisition and, other historic evils that the church is committed because they've been given too much power without any kind of check. So I think that right there is a good reason to have multiple, I guess, layers, spheres, if you will. It's very Kuyperian. I'm going to go talk to this guy first so I don't forget. I don't think it's on my map, so that's good. Do this last one. Last shrine. Then I can get out of here, maybe play for 20 minutes in Hyrule. It's warm down here too, my goodness. Let's do it. So, what can the church do to get more involved? I think the temptation would be to become overly political, where, let's say, I'm going to speak more from the pastoral perspective, because pastors definitely need to, in my opinion, equip their people, equip their sheep to deal with the issues of the modern era. So from a pastoral perspective, I know that there's a lot of, I'm not a pastor, but I've seen the temptation to retreat from pastors, and I've seen pastors retreat, unfortunately. Sometimes out of cowardice, but also because they just don't know how to address these things. In Canada, I think in the US too, you essentially have, you have tax code. That's how they get you. The tax code has very successfully muzzled the church in Canada. Not so much in the States. I think the States you guys just don't care as much, which is great. But the church in Canada has been successfully muzzled on political matters because, most churches wouldn't survive or be able to do the ministry that they do if they didn't have their charitable status. And once they get their charitable status revoked because they endorse a political party, or they denounce a political party, which is also illegal. Based on tax code, you would lose your charitable status. That right there is a great way to keep the church quiet. So pastors don't really know how to address the issue, unfortunately. So you have to be kind of crafty and sneaky in a way. When Jesus says, be wise as serpents, but innocent as doves. I kind of think that applies here. I made a post about that a while ago. In Canada, you have we had something called Bill C-4, and Bill C-4 did a number on the Canadian church. It's kind of a sleeper law now because no one's enforced it yet, but it will be enforced at some point, I'm sure. What Bill C-4 did is it banned conversion therapy, quote unquote. And this is what happens when you don't have Christians involved in the lawmaking process. So, conservative Christians, obviously, I'm just going to reiterate for anyone who doesn't know, conservative Christians don't hate homosexuals. What we do believe, conservative Christians, we believe that marriage is designed and instituted by God to be between one man and one woman for their lifetime, till death do they part. And sexuality, sexual relations, those are reserved for those are reserved for marriage between a man and a woman, and that's it. So here's an issue of conscience, in the game. It's making you pray to a goddess statue. I'm like, I view it similar to, how the New Testament describes idols. It's like, yeah, they're just pieces of wood. Yeah, I can play this game and not feel, convicted in my conscience that I'm actually praying to some kind of digital idol. But I know some people would have a problem with that. Anyway, Christians, conservative Christians, believe that that's the historical position. You can't find a position that would be similar to the affirming position within the first, essentially nearly 2,000 years of Christian history. The affirming position saying that, marriage or sexual relationships can be between two men or two women, and they would be blessed by God. You just can't find that in church history. And I'm Protestant, I'm sola scriptura, but I still think church history is extremely valuable. I think if you need more information on that, check out a guy named Gavin Ortland. Gavin Ortland, he's very helpful for church history and very beneficial source of knowledge. It's helped me a lot to appreciate church history. Anyway, Bill C-4 banned conversion therapy. And what conversion therapy is defined as in this bill is trying to convince somebody that their sexual orientation is incorrect and they need to move towards heterosexuality. Same thing would be applied to the issue of transgenderism. So to say to somebody, to sit down and counsel somebody and say, hey, your mental state is not in accordance with reality, and it's not in accordance with the way that God has made you and designed you, and you should actually move more towards accepting the physical body that you were born in, and not trying to change your, whatever gender identity or sex. So that would be how they would define. Well, they would define conversion therapy as a harmful act. I think that's. Okay. Anyway, they would define conversion therapy as a harmful act, and the liberals, and unfortunately, every political party voted for this bill. And it banned conversion therapy. It added a penalty to the criminal code, so you can face prison time if you are caught counseling somebody who is, LGBTQ. If you're caught counseling them, trying to convince them to accept and move towards heterosexuality, or what I would describe and what Christians would describe as the biblical standard for sexuality. That's now a criminal offense in Canada. If you are caught doing that, you could be, accused and charged and then tried as a criminal and then convicted criminally. So you would face criminal charges and you'd face jail time potentially for that. So Canada's in a rough spot right now when it comes to, freedom of speech, because that speech now is, can't do that. All it's going to take is one person who, sneaks into a random church, gets them to do conversion therapy, which we would just call, evangelism, or even just, discipleship. And we're not forcing anybody. That's the problem too. The way that they define, so this is really intelligent, the way that they did this. So I'm going to explain really quickly how the left works in Canada for sure, and then also, I'm sure in the United States. The way that the left works is they know that They need to tread lightly so that way they don't wake up the church in Canada or in the U.S. To be aware of some of the more, malicious things that they're trying to do. I think some of them have very nefarious intentions. I think some are also just, let's call them useful idiots. They believe in some of these, doctrines of progressivism. They don't believe in all the most extreme ones, but they'll go along with the ones that the more extreme members of the party are advocating for, just because it's the status quo within their party. And so what happens, in order to keep the church and the right wing and even the average person in Canada, what they'll do is they will introduce a bill, very similar to in the States, actually, where they'll introduce a bill that sounds relatively harmless. Like, it'll use either harmless language, overly broad language, or they'll introduce into the bill something that is so obviously accepted on both sides. And then they'll play this partisan game where when the other party votes against it, they will say, like, oh, see, they voted against this very obviously true thing. They don't actually care about, kids or something. So, for example, there's an example of, I think in this, there's a bill coming up that's supposed to add harsher penalties for child predators. I think it's, is it C8 right now in Canada? And of course, I think it's, it's harsher penalties for that. I think it's also, I should probably pull up the bill. Harsher penalties, and keeping it more, creating less avenues for them to kind of circumvent, barriers and boundaries in order to do evil things, and take advantage of children. So that's in the bill. But there's also a whole bunch of freedom of speech issues in that bill where it restricts and takes away it takes away the ability of individuals to post certain things. They add hate speech laws into the same bill. It adds essentially a charge to make essentially a sub-organization within the government, a bureaucracy within the government that would be in charge of internet censorship, essentially. Which, we don't want that. But they do it anyway. So the reason why they do that is because when the Conservatives in Canada inevitably vote against this bill, they are going to say, you don't actually care about children because you voted against this bill. Same play that they have in the U.S. And so it makes for good political point scoring for the political right, or political left against the political right. Now, the more heinous thing, or the more sneaky thing, actually, the more sneaky thing that, the government will do, that our liberal government will do, and I'm sure, governments in the States will do as well, is they will make the language so broad within the bill that they introduce so that the undiscerning eye won't catch anything wrong with the bill. It won't make anybody. It won't raise any eyebrows, I guess we can say. So the average person won't be interested in it. The people with very keen eyes, or the people who are paying attention, they will notice, and they will be extremely, frustrated with it, I guess. Let's say. Skip. I'll get back to this 1 second. Just want to get away from the cutscenes.
So when you and Princess Zelda...
Yep.
What? What?
Yeah.
Yes.
Cool. All right, let's get to the castle. I'm getting tired. Let's at least get to the castle. We get some cool weapons there too. Okay, so let's get back to that really quick. The more sneaky way that the government will implement these more harmful and dangerous bills, dangerous to the gospel, dangerous to the church, is that they will fill these bills with extremely broad and vague language that the average person, when they see the language of the bill or when they hear about it spoken about on the news or something like that, it won't raise any eyebrows. It'll be very carefully worded to not touch on any specific group or target any particular group. It'll be very broad in both its language of what it's prohibiting, but also who it would affect. And so, for example, one of the groups, or for example, in the bill C6 or C4, or any of the hate speech bills, it'll talk about hate speech. It'll talk about harmful. It'll talk about harm. It'll talk about violence sometimes, incitement or inciting hate or creating hate or disdain or anything like that. This broad language is used, and it's very frustrating that they use it because it's so clever. They'll use the broad language so that way there's no awareness from the average person. No one is going to push back on these bills because it's not specifically targeting anybody. But all they need is for the bill to pass with vague language, and then they can use the administrative state to add regulations to the bill, which would target specific groups. It's very creative, very clever, and it keeps people unaware. So Christians need to be aware of these things. Christians need to keep their eyes open when these bills come out. If you're not paying attention, if you're not paying close attention to these kinds of things, you will be, caught off guard, and you might actually end up, even supporting legislation that hurts you and hurts the church in the long run. So that's another thing. When people think about persecution, I think we have a really wrong idea of persecution in the West. I think we have a bad understanding of persecution because we tend to equate persecution. I don't even remember what this thing said. Hold on. What did this say? What am I supposed to do? What do I do? I can't remember what I'm supposed to do here. I should have paid attention. Am I supposed to... I've already got something fused. Oh, man. Do I just let it kill me? Oh, that's a charge attack. Thank you. Alright, that's better. Alright, pay attention next time. That was dumb. Alright, where was I at again? Talking about these bills that came through. Christians. Oh, persecution. Okay, so persecution. This is kind of where maybe we can slowly wrap things up. We're getting close to 2 hours into this stream. Persecution's interesting because we have an idea of persecution that comes from, our pictures of first century Christians, or even even nowadays we got Christians who are being martyred regularly in Nigeria right now, for example. It's a great example. And persecution is explicit and it's violent, and people's lives are being lost, being taken in violent persecutions that are happening all over the world, specifically in Nigeria now. But we get our picture of what persecution looks like there. So we basically are told, when Christian conservatives are sounding the alarm, we're told we're not being persecuted. Look at what happens in other areas of the world, and look at what happened back to the first century. We're not being persecuted because, you can't, say something like, men are men and women are women, and you get in trouble for that, or you get kicked off of social media, or you're vilified online. That's not persecution. And trust me, that happens all the time. That's happened to me. People have told me that, and I'm like, no, I get it. I'm not trying to equivocate between, persecution in Nigeria and someone saying mean things about me on the internet, or, someone getting banned on X or Instagram or whatever. They're not the same level of persecution. But it is a form of persecution still. You are being treated poorly, sometimes in a hostile manner because of your faith. That is persecution. So yes, Christians are being persecuted for their beliefs in this way, and for those reasons. They're not political reasons either. They are Christian reasons. My political theology doesn't come from my own philosophy or my own preferences. Nor does my theology come from my political philosophy. That's an important distinction to make, I think. If you are engaged in politics in any way, you need to have this very clearly thought through. My political theology and my political opinions. My political opinions come from what I believe to be true about Scripture. They're not coming from my own preferences. They're not coming from pragmatics. They're not coming from, philosophy. I believe what I believe politically because of what I believe scripturally. That's an important distinction to make, because what a lot of people will do is they'll confuse the two, and they'll actually switch the order of that. They'll make the order of operations wrong, where they will start with their political philosophy and then move that into their theology. They will derive their theology from their politics. That's backwards, and that's a bad idea, because you will end up with, false movements, unhelpful movements that do become more nationalistic in an unhealthy way, where the focus isn't on God, the glory of God, and His morality. It's what's best for the state. So we have to be careful for that, but we also, when we're talking about this stuff with people, we need to be very clear that your political philosophy, political theology is coming from your politics, or it's not coming from your politics, it's coming from theology. And that's why when people say Charlie Kirk wasn't a martyr, I get upset about that, because Charlie Kirk was killed not just because he had wrong political views. Those political views came from somewhere, and he grounded them in Scripture. He believed what he believed because he believed that God said that it was so. And so if someone killed him because he would say that men are men and women are women, and you can't change between the two, and he derived that from his Christian beliefs, but he was just acting it out in a consistent manner in how he evangelized and how he debated, that means he was killed not just because of his politics, but because of the root of his politics, which is his theology. So we need to be very careful with how we articulate that, because we can very easily be accused of making an idol out of politics. And we obviously shouldn't do that, but we also need to be very clear that our politics is just a practical outflow of our theology that we start with, which is why it's so important to be discipled right at a good church, so that way you have a strong foundation upon which you build your political theology. So that is my soapbox for that idea. Let's get through this cutscene. Maybe I'll drink some water too, while also clicking the button. So close to the end. We'll just get past this. We'll see. Oh, it's Zelda. We'll see Zelda the first time. Outside of flashbacks and the intro to the game. So, I'm going to distill a lot of those ideas into a video, a longer video. That will be a little bit more, well, it's not going to be a longer video. It'll probably be aiming for around like 10 to 15 minutes or something like that. Just a clear articulation of why I believe the church needs to be more involved in politics. And why it's a mistake for us to disengage politically. I think that's a message that needs to be heard nowadays. Not enough people are, well, I shouldn't say that. Not enough pastors in Canada are talking about it. There are many in the States talking about it, but there's still a very overwhelming faction of Christians who seem to want to remain disengaged and stay in kind of their pious sphere, their high and mighty, lofty ivory theological towers. Politics and social matters, civil matters are too dirty for the clergy to get involved in. That's, again, I think it's wrong-headed. When Jesus says, all authority has been given to me, to him, to Jesus Christ. All authority on heaven and on earth has been given to him. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey all that I have commanded you. And surely I will be with you to the end of the age. And that's the Great Commission, Matthew 28. If we make disciples, we should expect to see Christians discipled Christian politicians. Why would we leave the sword to those who don't know God, who don't want God and don't want his laws? They call what he calls good evil, and they call what God calls evil good. That's in Isaiah, talking about the the depravity of man and our natural instinct. And we have to fight that. And I think we need to be active about it. The church needs to be active about it. The way that I was thinking about it is, we use the analogy or the idiom of an uphill battle. And yes, this political fight is definitely an uphill battle. But a lot of people seem to think that they can just engage or disengage from this battle, this uphill battle, and hope that somehow all will work out. That's a very, last generation mentality. Like, oh, it's all going to work out. Nothing ever happens, really. Nothing bad happens. It's all going to work out. And as much as I want that to be true, it's just, I don't know. The analogy I think of is, pushing a cart up a hill. Our sinful nature is gravity, and it inclines us. It inclines the cart to fall down, to go down. It makes the cart want to go down the hill, and we're pushing up against it. Not by our own might, but empowered by the Holy Spirit. Those who are saved can push the cart up the hill, but it's a challenge. It's hard. It's much easier to just go where we're naturally inclined, which is down. But we can't engage as if gravity is the only thing that's pushing against us. It's actually also somebody on the other side of the cart trying to push it back down the hill. We need to think of it that way too. It's like there is an active movement attempting to work against us and counter the work of God through his church. And so we need to think about it that way. I think we need to be more intentional and aggressive with how we deal with these issues. And that might mean speaking more explicitly and plainly when we're talking to our congregations. And just to people in general. So those are my thoughts there. Let's get through this cutscene quick, or this dialogue, and then we're going to wrap it up. Skip, skip, skip. So slow. But then we almost got the paraglider, and then the game gets fun. So I will come back to this game. We're going to keep on playing through. I am planning on playing Battlefield as well when it comes out. At this point, it's not out yet, obviously. Battlefield 6. I'm excited for that one. So play some of that. It's harder to have conversations in that one, though, because it's so fast-paced. So I'm going to play it by ear. See how much I can actually do with that game before it becomes too challenging to actually, fulfill the purpose of this channel.
Yeah. Check it. Woohoo!
Great. We did it. And now that's auto-saved, we're good. And I think we can wrap it up there. So, thank you guys for checking it out, for tuning in. I'll try and be on again soon, and we'll keep talking about this important stuff. Maybe I'll pull up some articles or talk more in depth about things like, Bill C4 or C8 that is not passed yet. C4 did pass, but C8, we'll see. If I can find some documents, we can talk about that. If there's any breaking news, maybe I'll respond to that as well. I kind of want to talk about, reaction content, not like cheap reaction videos, but respond and process in real time things that I see either on social media or in the news or something like that. So yeah, let me know if you see anything that you like or you want more of, or if you have content that you want me to respond to or think about, please let me know. And yeah, I will see you next time I stream. So thank you very much and have a great night.